Snow hammered the cracked windows of Ruby's Diner, a forgotten corner of Boston where dreams froze faster than the coffee refills. Grace Nolan's hands trembled as she wiped down the counter for the 5th time that hour. The night shift was slow, and the heater coughed out more noise than warmth. Her apron smelled faintly of grease and burnt toast, and the only thing heavier than her tray was the weight of her mother's medical bills folded in her pocket. At 24, Grace's life was a routine of exhaustion. Diner, hospital, sleep. Her mother, Margaret, had been in a coma for 3 months after the car accident. Grace worked double shifts to keep the machines running and the collectors away. Her only company tonight was the steady buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft hum of the jukebox playing a song from before she was born. Then the door opened, and a gust of icy air cut through the diner like a knife. A man stepped in tall, perfectly pressed, and completely out of place. His coat looked like it cost more than the diner's monthly rent, and the scent of his cologne didn't belong anywhere near cheap coffee. Alexander Ward. Grace didn't recognize the name yet, but half the city's fortune did. He took a booth near the window, gloved hands removing a sleek gold ring that caught the flickering light. Grace approached with her practiced smile. "Evening, sir." "Coffee?" He nodded without looking up. "Black." "No sugar." His voice was low, calm, but carried that tone people who never heard the word no. Grace poured his coffee, trying not to stare, but her eyes caught the ring, again an old design, gold band carved with a crest shaped like 2 intertwined wings, and a faint scratch across the edge. Her heart stuttered. She'd seen it before, exactly the same, on her mother's hand every day of her childhood. Before she could stop herself, words slipped out, quiet but clear. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." The cup froze halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face, his eyes snapping up to meet hers gray, sharp, full of disbelief and something darker. "What did you just say?" Grace's breath hitched. The air felt electric, too heavy to breathe. The diner seemed to shrink around them, every sound fading into silence. She stammered. "Just meant it looks familiar. My mum's ring, same design, I think." Alexander didn't blink. His jaw clenched. Slowly, he slid the ring back on, as if hiding a ghost. "Impossible," he murmured under his breath, standing abruptly. Bills fluttered to the counter, untouched coffee steaming in his wake. Grace stood frozen, confusion tightening her chest. Outside, the wind howled as his black car disappeared into the snow. She didn't know it yet, but that one sentence had just torn open a secret buried for 25 years. Grace stood behind the counter long after the stranger's car vanished into the snow. The bills he left fluttered in the draft, but her mind wasn't on the money. She couldn't shake the image of that ring, the way the light caught the worn gold, and the small scratch across its edge exactly like her mother's. Her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. Recognition? Fear? It didn't matter. The man's reaction had been too sharp, too real. No one looked at a waitress that way, unless her words had struck a nerve. By midnight, Ruby's diner was empty except for Grace and the cook, Hank, who was mopping the floor with more attitude than effort. "You look like you saw a ghost," he muttered. "That guy stiff you on the check." Grace forced a smile. "No." He paid more than enough. She didn't add that he'd looked at her like she'd spoken a curse. When the lights flicked off an hour later, Grace stepped out into the icy night. The wind clawed at her coat, and the snow turned the street into a mirror of white silence. A black sedan sat parked across from the diner, engine idling. For a moment, she thought she saw the same man inside, but when she blinked, the car was gone. Across town, inside a glass tower that reached above the storm, Alexander Ward stood before a fire that didn't warm him. His reflection in the window was a man built from success and secrets. He'd built Ward systems from scratch, after the death of his wife, Madeline, 20 years ago. The ring, the one now burning cold against his skin, had been hers. It was supposed to be buried with her. He'd watched the casket lower into the ground himself. Yet that waitress, that girl, had said her mother owned the same ring. Same crest. Same scratch. It couldn't be a coincidence. His mind, usually sharp as a scalpel, now throbbed with questions he didn't want to ask. He turned to his assistant, a sleek woman named Cara Lewis. "Find out everything about a Grace Nolan. Works at Ruby's Diner on 5th. Cara hesitated. "Personal matter, sir?" "Just do it," he snapped, then softened his tone. Discreetly. Within hours, his security team was combing through databases. Name, Grace Nolan. Age, 24. Address, a rundown apartment in Dorchester. Mother, Margaret Nolan, 52, currently in a coma at St. Mary's Hospital. No record of a father. No known relatives. Alexander stared at the report. Margaret Nolan. Something about the name prickled in the back of his mind, like a memory behind a locked door. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph, his late wife, smiling on a sunlit pier. Her face was softer, but the resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same mouth. Grace could have been her daughter. But that was impossible. Madeline had died 20 years ago, and he had buried her himself. Back in her small apartment, Grace tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Her phone buzzed a call from the hospital. Her mother's condition had worsened. She threw on her coat and ran through the snow. In the sterile light of the ICU, Grace took her mother's cold hand. The ring identical to the Billionaire's gleamed faintly beneath the bandages. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. "Where did you get this?" Margaret didn't move, but a single tear slid down her cheek. Grace gasped. Her mother hadn't shed a tear in months. Behind her, through the glass window, a shadow passed silently, a man in a dark coat watching. And when Grace turned around, the hallway was empty, except for a single business card lying on the floor. Ward Systems Confidential Contact. The sterile hum of hospital machines had become the soundtrack of Grace's life. She sat by her mother's bedside, the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to her clothes, her hands curled around a paper cup of cold coffee. Margaret Nolan's chest rose and fell in shallow, mechanical rhythm. The doctors called it stable. Grace called it barely alive. Every hour here cost more than she earned in a week, but she couldn't stay away. Outside the window, the city was waking. Nurses changed shifts. The world moved on. But Grace was still trapped in yesterday's nightmare, the Billionaire, the ring, and now the card. She pulled it from her pocket, staring at the embossed logo. Ward Systems. The name buzzed at the edge of her memory. She'd seen it before on the side of medical equipment in this very hospital. They manufactured the life support machine keeping her mother alive. Her phone vibrated. The hospital's billing department again. "Miss Nolan, this is your final notice. Unless we receive payment by Friday, your mother's treatment will be suspended." Her throat went dry. "You can't just shell die." "I'm sorry, Mom. We've made exceptions for months. There's nothing more we can do." The line went dead. Grace pressed her forehead to her hands, the world spinning. She had two choices, miracles or desperation. She whispered to her unconscious mother, "Mom, what do I do? Please just wake up." The monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to her plea. Behind her, a nurse entered, gentle but weary. "Grace, there's a man in the lobby asking for you." Grace frowned. "Who?" He said his name's Mr. Ward. Her pulse jumped. She rose too fast, the chair scraping the floor. Downstairs, Alexander Ward looked impossibly out of place amid the cheap vinyl chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. His presence drew stares. Even the receptionist whispered his name. He turned when he saw Grace, eyes unreadable. "I didn't mean to startle you," he began. "I just wanted to make sure your mother was all right." Grace folded her arms. "Why do you care? You left the diner like I'd cursed you." He exhaled slowly. "Because the ring you mentioned it belonged to my late wife. There's no way your mother could have it." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Then you're wrong. She's worn it since I was a kid." Alexander studied her face, searching for something, truth, maybe, or a memory. "May I see it?" She hesitated, then led him upstairs. In the hospital room, the weak sunlight fell across Margaret's hand. The ring gleamed faintly. Alexander's breath caught. His composure cracked for just a moment. "That's impossible," he whispered, stepping closer. "There were only two ever made, hers and mine." Grace stared at him. "Then how did my mum get it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at Margaret's face, pale beneath the hospital lights. A flicker of recognition crossed his features, like a ghost passing through him. "Who are you really?" Grace demanded. Alexander turned toward her, his voice low, almost broken. "Someone who's been lied to, for a very long time." He slipped a card onto the table. "If you want to know the truth, come to Ward Tower tomorrow morning, alone." Then he left as quietly as he came. Grace sank into the chair beside her mother, heart pounding. The ring glowed against the blanket, innocent and cruel all at once. She whispered, "Mom, what did you do?" Outside the door, the nurse glanced both ways before picking up her phone. "She took the bait," she whispered. "He doesn't know she's not supposed to be alive." The next morning, Boston was a sheet of frozen glass. Grace stood at the foot of Ward Tower, a 50-story monument of glass and power, piercing the grey sky. Her reflection trembled in the spotless doors before she entered. She felt out of place among the marble floors, gold elevators, and people who wore money like a second skin. Her diner uniform was gone. Today she wore her one good coat, the fabric thinning at the cuffs. She clutched her bag, where her mother's hospital bill peeked out like a scar. At the security desk, the guard glanced at her ID, then at his tablet. "You're expected. Mr. Ward is on the top floor." Grace's stomach twisted. Expected? How long had he been planning this? The elevator ride was silent, except for the faint hum of machinery. When the doors opened, a different world unfolded: polished wood, sleek furniture, walls lined with photos of technological triumphs. Behind a vast glass wall, Alexander Ward stood overlooking the frozen harbor. He didn't turn when she entered. "You came." "I almost didn't," she said. "Hospitals don't give day passes to broke waitresses." He half smiled, eyes still on the skyline. "You're not here because of money." Grace bristled. "You don't know why I'm here." He finally turned. "You're here because you saw something you weren't supposed to. That ring isn't a coincidence." Grace crossed her arms. "So tell me, where did it come from?" Alexander walked to a glass case on the wall. Inside rested a photograph, his late wife, Madeline, her smile frozen in time, wearing the same ring. She died 20 years ago. Car accident. The ring was buried with her, or so I thought. Grace stared at the photo. The resemblance to her mother was uncanny. Same eyes, same jawline softened by time. Her chest tightened. "She looks like my mom." Alexander's gaze sharpened. "Your mother's name is Margaret Nolan?" "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated, then retrieved a manila folder from his desk. Inside were records, employment logs, hospital documents. Margaret Nolan worked at St. Mary's 24 years ago, same hospital where Madeline was treated before she died. Same floor. Grace's pulse pounded in her ears. "That doesn't mean anything. It might mean everything." He closed the folder and leaned forward. "Tell me something, Grace. Do you know who your father is?" The question hit like a slap. "My mother never told me." "Maybe she couldn't." he said quietly. Maybe someone made sure she wouldn't. Grace shook her head, backing away. This is insane. You think my mom stole your wife's ring? That she's part of some conspiracy? I think, Alexander said, voice low and deliberate, that someone wanted me to believe my wife was dead, and your mother might know why. The air between them thickened. For a second, Grace saw something raw in his eyes, fear, guilt, longing. Then it vanished. He slid an envelope across the desk. That's a check, enough to cover your mother's medical bills. Take it. You'll owe me a conversation later. Grace hesitated, anger and confusion warring inside her. If this is pity. It's insurance, he interrupted. If I'm right, your life may already be in danger. Grace froze. What do you mean? Alexander looked past her, toward the door. Someone followed you here. Grace spun around. The receptionist's desk was empty. The elevator light flickered, red descending fast. Go home, he ordered. Lock your doors. But as Grace stepped into the hallway, she saw a woman in a grey suit standing near the exit, phone pressed to her ear. Their eyes met. The woman smiled faintly and whispered, Target confirmed. TR. L. 6. Tay content. Try. View drama. CH. U. BN. DNE. Part 5. The Visit. The Secret Services. Grace ran the 6 blocks from Ward Tower back to her apartment, heart hammering like a trapped bird. The woman in the grey suit, those cold eyes, that faint smile followed her in flashes, reflected in the glass of passing cars. When Grace ducked into an alley, the street was empty again. She pressed her back to a wall, breath fogging in the air, trying to convince herself she was being paranoid. But she wasn't. Someone wanted her scared. By the time she reached her building, her fingers were numb. The hallway smelled of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant. She fumbled with her keys, half expecting the woman to step out of the shadows. When the door finally creaked open, the apartment looked exactly as she left it. Except for one thing. The envelope Alexander had given her sat on the table, untouched, but the window was slightly open, snow drifting in. Her stomach knotted. She checked her drawers, her closet, even under the bed. Nothing was missing except her mother's photo album. A sudden knock made her flinch. Grace, you home? It was her neighbor, Mrs. Ortega, the retired nurse from down the hall. Grace cracked the door open. Everything okay? Mrs. Ortega's voice dropped. There was a woman here earlier. Said she was from the hospital. Asked questions about your mother. Grace's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? She wanted to know when your mom was admitted, who paid the bills. I told her to talk to the staff, not me. Mrs. Ortega frowned. You in trouble, honey? Grace forced a smile. No, just a misunderstanding. When the door closed, she sank onto the couch. The card from Ward Systems still burned in her pocket. She took out her phone and called the hospital. The nurse on duty answered in a sleepy voice. Hi, this is Grace Nolan. Can you check if anyone from Ward Systems came to visit my mother tonight? The nurse paused. Ward Systems? No visitors tonight, ma'am. Wait, hold on. Grace heard muffled voices, a shuffle of papers. The nurse came back, tense. Actually, your mother's room was accessed 20 minutes ago by someone on the VIP list. There's no name, just a code. W.S. Grace's hand trembled. Is she okay? She's stable, but wait, her ring's gone. Grace's breath caught. What? Her ring, the one she always wore. It's not on her finger. The phone slipped from Grace's hand. She grabbed her coat and bolted into the night. At St. Mary's, the corridors were dim and half-deserted. She rushed to her mother's room, only to find the bed empty, the monitors disconnected. Panic clawed her chest. Mom? A voice behind her said calmly. She's safe for now. Grace spun around. Alexander stood in the doorway, coat dusted with snow. His eyes looked haunted. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I moved her to a secure facility," he said. "Someone inside the hospital was trying to get to her first. You had no right." "I'm protecting her," he said quietly. "And you?" Grace shook her head. "From who? That woman in the grey suit?" Alexander's expression darkened. "Her name is Cara Lewis. She used to work for me. She's not asking questions anymore. She's covering tracks. My mother's tracks." Grace stared at him, disbelief mixing with dread. "Your mother? Why would she care about us?" Alexander met her eyes. "Because if what I think is true, your mother once saved my wife's life. And my mother buried that secret with a lie." Before Grace could speak, the hallway lights flickered. A door down the corridor opened by itself. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper. "We need to leave. Right now." The snow fell thicker as Alexander's car sped through the empty streets, headlights cutting pale tunnels in the storm. Grace sat in the passenger seat, trembling, clutching the seatbelt like a lifeline. Her mother was gone, moved without warning. Everything she knew about her life was unraveling, one lie at a time. "Where are you taking her?" she demanded, her voice sharp over the sound of the tires slicing through slush. "To a private clinic outside the city," Alexander replied. "A place no one can reach her without my clearance." "You think I'm supposed to trust you?" Grace shot back. "You show up, you steal my mother, and you expect me to just believe this is protection." Alexander glanced at her, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You're safer with me than with anyone connected to my family." Grace clenched her fists. "Your family? You mean the same people sending women in grey suits to break into my apartment?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the steady rhythm of the wipers. When they reached the outskirts of the city, the skyline disappeared into darkness. The car pulled up before a gated estate, more fortress than hospital. Guards waved them through. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a private suite where Margaret Nolan lay asleep, machines humming softly. She looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos outside. Grace rushed to her mother's side, tears blurring her vision. "Mum, I'm here. You're okay." Alexander stood by the doorway, watching her. There was something almost human in his expression, remorse, maybe, or regret. "No one will find her here," he said quietly. Grace turned on him. "You keep saying that, but you won't tell me why she's even in danger. What did my mom ever do to you?" He hesitated, then walked closer. 24 years ago, my wife, Madeline, was in a car accident. The police said she died instantly, but I've never seen her body. I only had that ring to bury." He paused, his voice lowering. "Your mother worked at the hospital where my wife was taken that night." Grace's heartbeat quickened. "You think my mum was involved in that?" "She was a nurse, not some criminal." "I don't know what she was," he said. "But that ring, it was made in pairs. One for me, one for Madeline. The engraving inside yours." Grace cut him off, pulling the ring from her pocket. "I already know. It says AW to MW, for forever. It's her ring, isn't it?" Alexander looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost. "Yes, that's her ring." Grace took a step back, her breath trembling. "Then my mother's a thief? Is that what you're saying?" "No," he said quickly. "I think she's the reason my wife survived." Grace froze. "Survived?" Alexander nodded slowly. "If Madeline didn't die that night, someone hid her and your mother was the last person who saw her alive." Grace shook her head, the room spinning. "That's impossible. My mum never said a word." "Because she was warned not to," he said. "My mother, Evelyn Ward, had every reason to erase that night from existence. She hated Madeline, hated what she represented." Grace's voice cracked. "So now you think my mom helped your wife fake her death?" I think she helped her escape, Alexander said. And if I'm right, that makes you the only person left who can expose what my mother did. Grace's eyes filled with tears, a mix of anger and disbelief. You don't even know me. Why would you drag me into your family's lies? He stepped closer. Because those lies might be the reason you exist. Grace's breath caught. What are you talking about? Before he could answer, one of the guards burst in, pale-faced. Sir, we have a problem. The security cameras. Someone just cut the feed. The lights flickered. The monitors beside Margaret's bed beeped wildly. Alexander grabbed Grace's hand. They found us. The alarm wailed through the private clinic, a shrill metallic scream that sliced through the night. Red emergency lights strobed against the white walls, painting Grace and Alexander in flashes of crimson panic. Grace's heart pounded so hard she thought she could hear it echoing off the glass. What's happening? She cried, clutching her mother's arm. Alexander's voice was steady, but tight. Security breach. Someone got past the gate. How? You said this place was safe. He didn't answer. He was already pulling her away from the bed. Move. Grace refused. I'm not leaving her. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the IV stand, and pushed the entire bed toward the door. Then help me keep her alive. The two guards sprinted down the hall, weapons drawn. One shouted over his shoulder, 3 hostiles east wing! Grace's lungs burned as they pushed the rolling bed toward the elevator. Her mother's monitors beeped erratically, cords tangling around the wheels. Alexander slammed the elevator button repeatedly. Nothing. They've shut it down, he muttered. Stairs. They turned the corner straight into the barrel of a gun. The woman in the grey suit stood at the end of the hall, her calm smile illuminated by the flashing red lights. Kara Lewis. Alexander, she said smoothly, lowering her weapon just slightly. You always were predictable. Grace froze. Alexander stepped in front of her. You don't have to do this, Kara. You used to believe in the truth. I still do, Kara replied. But your truth costs too much. Mrs. Ward doesn't forgive mistakes. Grace's stomach dropped. Evelyn Ward sent you? Kara's eyes flicked toward her. You must be Grace. The waitress. I see why he's so protective. You look exactly like her. Like who? Grace demanded. Kara smiled faintly. Like Madeline. Alexander moved faster than Grace thought possible. He lunged, knocking the gun aside. The shot exploded, deafening, shattering a light fixture above them. Grace screamed as sparks rained down. Kara fell backward, hitting the floor hard. Alexander grabbed Grace's wrist. They tore down the stairwell, Grace gasping for breath. What does she mean I look like your wife? He'll explain later. You keep saying that. The stairwell door burst open behind them. Kara's voice echoed, You can't run from this. Alexander reached into his coat and threw something metallic down the steps. A flashbang. The explosion filled the stairwell with blinding white light. Grace stumbled, ears ringing, as he pulled her through a service door that led into a dim underground parking area. Snow had drifted inside, the air cold enough to sting. Alexander pushed her toward a black SUV. Get in. Grace hesitated. What about my mother? She's safe with the guards, he said, breathless. They'll get her out through the west entrance. Grace's hands shook as she climbed in. This is insane. People are shooting at us, and I still don't even know why. Alexander started the engine, tires squealing. Because 24 years ago, someone switched 2 lives and one of those lives was yours. Grace stared at him, disbelief written across her face. Mine? What are you saying? He didn't look at her. His jaw tightened. I'm saying Margaret Nolan might not be your real mother. The SUV tore through the icy night, sirens wailing in the distance. Grace turned toward the window, tears blurring the lights. Her reflection stared back at her pale, trembling, lost. "Then who am I?" Alexander's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "That's what we're going to find out." Behind them, in the chaos of flashing lights and shattered glass, Cara Lewis stood up, blood at the corner of her mouth, phone pressed to her ear. "She's alive," she hissed. "Tell Evelyn Wardface 2 begins." The storm had calmed by morning, leaving Boston buried beneath a white hush. Grace sat in Alexander's penthouse kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes rimmed red. The sterile luxury around her, gleaming marble, chrome appliances, panoramic windows, felt like another planet. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of Cara's gun, the scream of alarms, the image of her mother, unconscious and helpless. Alexander stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He looked older, edges sharper. "We're running out of time," he said finally. "Evelyn won't stop. She knows the truth is close." Grace's voice was hoarse. "Then stop talking in riddles. You keep saying my life isn't what I think it is." "Fine. Prove it." He studied her for a long moment, then placed a sealed white envelope on the table. "That's a DNA report. I had it rushed through a private lab." Grace frowned. "When?" "The night I met you." Her chest tightened. "You tested me? Without asking? I needed to know if what I feared was real." Grace stared at the envelope, her pulse roaring in her ears. "And what exactly did you fear?" "That you might be connected to my family in a way neither of us expected." Her hands shook as she tore the envelope open. The paper inside was thick, official, lined with numbers and cold words. But her eyes locked on one sentence highlighted in yellow. "DNA match between Alexander Ward and Grace Nolan. 99.8%. The world tilted. Grace's throat went dry. What does this mean?" Alexander swallowed hard, voice rough. "It means you're my daughter." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. "That's impossible. My mum Margaret, she would have told me." "Maybe she couldn't," he said quietly. "If Evelyn found out Madeline survived the crash and had a child, she would have done anything to bury it, including threatening the woman who helped her." Grace shook her head violently. "No, you're saying my mum lied my whole life? That I'm some billionaire's secret?" Alexander took a step toward her, but she backed away. "Grace, listen to me, don't call me that," she snapped. "You had me tested like some lab rat. You don't get to call me anything." He looked pained. "You deserved to know the truth. I don't even know what the truth is." Grace's voice cracked. "Was your wife, my supposed mother, alive? Dead? Am I your daughter, or just another secret Evelyn Ward wants to erase?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Madeline was alive long enough to give birth. The hospital records were altered. Evelyn must have forced your mother. Margareta raised you under a false name. She probably thought she was protecting you." Grace pressed her hands to her temples. "This is insane. My entire life fake?" He took a deep breath. "You were never meant to find out." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You're right. I wish I hadn't." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed sharply on the counter. He glanced at the screen and froze. The message read, "She knows. Check the news." He turned on the television. Every major network flashed the same headline. "Waitress claims to be secret. Daughter of Alexander Ward corporate empire in crisis." Grace's face filled the screen an image from the diner's security camera, grainy but clear. Her stomach dropped. How did they get that? Alexander's eyes darkened. "Cara," Grace whispered, voice breaking. "They're coming for us, aren't they?" He met her gaze, grim and certain. "No, Grace. They're coming for you." The next 48 hours hit Grace like a hurricane. Every screen, Every radio, every headline screamed her name. Waitress exposes billionaire's hidden daughter. Scandal in the Ward dynasty. Mystery woman could destroy empire worth 80 billion. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Camera flashes exploding like lightning whenever a shadow moved behind the curtains. She couldn't go home, couldn't go to the hospital, couldn't even check on her mother without being chased. Her phone overflowed with messages from strangers, some calling her brave, most calling her a liar. Inside the penthouse, Grace sat curled on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, watching the chaos unfold on live TV. Her face, pale and frightened, filled the screen beside an image of Alexander's confident corporate portrait. Two worlds colliding in high definition. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Alexander stood behind her, jaw clenched, phone pressed to his ear. I said, "Pull the story. Pay whatever it takes." He hung up and turned toward her. The leak came from inside Ward Systems. "My mother has friends in every newsroom from here to Washington." Grace looked up, eyes hollow. "So your mother decided to ruin me publicly instead of killing me quietly." How thoughtful. He winced. "She's trying to force me to disown you. If I do, the press will bury it within a week. If I don't, then I'm a scandal you can't control." The words hung between them, sharp as glass. Alexander sat beside her. "Grace, listen to me. I can fix this. He'll hold a press conference, explain that you're not my daughter, that it's all a misunderstanding." Her chest tightened. "You'll lie? He'll protect you," he said. "Once the spotlight fades, we'll find your mother and get out of the country." Grace shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're asking me to erase myself." Again. "You think I want to live as some secret you hide whenever it's inconvenient?" He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. The television cut to breaking news, an anchor standing outside Ward Systems headquarters. "Sources confirm a second DNA test has been ordered by Evelyn Ward herself. Results expected within 24 hours. Grace's stomach twisted. "She's testing me again?" Alexander's voice turned cold. "She's testing me. She's going to claim I falsified the results. She'll do anything to protect the family name." Grace stood abruptly. "Then let's go public first. Tell the truth before she twists it." He looked at her as if she'd suggested jumping off the balcony. That would destroy everything. "The board, the stock, the company, maybe it deserves to be destroyed," she shouted. "You built an empire on silence and secrets. People like me pay the price for that." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just looked tired. "You sound like Madeleine." Grace froze. "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. She said almost the same thing the night she died. A knock shattered the silence. 3 sharp raps against the heavy door. Alexander stiffened. "Don't move." He crossed the room, hand slipping beneath his jacket. When he opened the door, 2 men in black suits stood outside, holding government badges. "Mr. Ward," the taller one said, "we need to ask you and Miss Nolan to come with us." "On what grounds?" "Corporate fraud and obstruction of investigation. We have a warrant." Grace's pulse spiked. "This is your mother, isn't it?" "She's behind this too." Alexander's voice was low, controlled. "Get my lawyer on the phone." The agents exchanged a glance. "You can call him at the station." They stepped forward. Grace instinctively reached for Alexander's arm. He met her eyes, a flicker of defiance there. "Don't say a word," he murmured, as they led them both toward the waiting elevator. Behind them, the TV blared the headline that would change everything. DNA retest leaked results. Claim Grace Nolan is not Alexander Ward's daughter. The holding room at the Boston Federal Building was small, windowless, and cold. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, buzzing like a fly trapped inside glass. Grace sat at the steel table, wrists trembling, though she wasn't handcuffed. The air reeked of coffee and fear. Across the hallway, Alexander Ward was being questioned by federal investigators, his empire suddenly hanging by a thread. She had been dragged here in front of flashing cameras, escorted by agents who looked more like actors than law enforcement. The world had watched her humiliation live on television, the billionaire's supposed daughter, now branded a fraud. The door opened. A woman in a navy blazer entered, tablet in hand. "Miss Nolan, I'm Special Agent Rivera. You're not under arrest, but we need your statement." Grace met her gaze. Statement about what? Rivera slid a tablet across the table. On screen were 2 DNA reports, one familiar, one new. The second one, stamped Boston State Lab, showed a result Grace could barely process. No biological relation between Alexander Ward and Grace Nolan. Her voice cracked. This can't be real. The first test said Mr. Ward provided falsified documents, Rivera interrupted calmly. We're investigating whether he tampered with evidence to protect you. Grace's chest tightened. He didn't falsify anything. He was trying to find out the truth. Then why, Rivera asked, did the retest come from Ward Systems' own lab? Grace's breath caught. Because he was scared your people would leak it before it was ready. Rivera sighed. Miss Nolan, you seem like a good person who got caught in something much bigger than herself. If you cooperate, we can protect you. Protect me from what? The agent hesitated. From Evelyn Ward. Grace blinked. You know about her? We've been tracking her offshore accounts for months, Rivera said. If what we suspect is true, your existence threatens everything she's built. Before Grace could answer, the door swung open. Alexander stood there, flanked by 2 agents. His tie was gone. His composure cracked but not broken. She's leaving with me, he said firmly. Rivera frowned. You can't just I can, he snapped, producing a document. Court order. My lawyers move faster than your bureaucracy. Grace rose on shaky legs. They said the test was fake. Alexander's eyes locked on hers. It was. As they stepped into the hallway, flashes from the waiting press lit up the glass doors like a lightning storm. Reporters screamed questions. Mr. Ward, did you fake DNA results? Grace, are you his mistress? Is this all a publicity stunt? Alexander's hand hovered protectively near her back. Ignore them, he murmured. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. They climbed into a waiting car driven by one of Alexander's security men. Grace's voice trembled. Tell me the truth. Did you fake it? No, he said. But my mother did. Grace froze. Evelyn? He nodded grimly. She owns the lab that produced the new results. She's rewriting reality, the same way she did 24 years ago. Grace pressed her hands against her face. She's making me look like a liar. The whole world hates me now. She's scared, Alexander said quietly. She only attacks what threatens her. Grace turned to him, eyes burning. Then let's give her something to be afraid of. He looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done hiding, Grace said. If she wants to play dirty, we go public with everything. The ring, the records, my mother's story. He'll tell the truth, live on air. Alexander's jaw tightened. That could destroy both of us. Grace leaned forward, fire in her eyes. Or it could destroy her. A moment of silence passed, heavy as thunder. Then Alexander nodded once. All right. Tomorrow morning, we end this. Neither noticed the small red light blinking beneath the dashboard. Camera, someone else was already listening. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of helicopters circling above the city. The world outside Alexander's penthouse windows glittered with frost, but the streets below pulsed with chaos news vans, protesters, and camera crews swarming like bees around a hive. Headlines crawled across the television. Ward dynasty in ruins. DNA fraud scandal explodes. a waitress at the center of a billion-dollar cover-up. Grace sat on the couch, clutching a mug she hadn't touched. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across her face. She had agreed to Alexander's planto. Tell the world everything live, with no spin, no lawyers, no PR filters. But the closer it got, the less certain she felt. Alexander entered the room, phone in hand, suit perfectly pressed despite the sleepless night. "The press conference is scheduled for noon," he said. "My team will escort you through the back entrance. No one will touch you." Grace gave a hollow laugh. "They already have. Everyone thinks I'm either your mistake or your lie." He crouched beside her, voice low. "Once we expose Evelyn, the narrative changes. People will see you for what you are, a victim of her manipulation." Grace looked up, eyes red. "And if we're wrong, what if my mother was part of it?" Alexander hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. "Then we face it together." Before Grace could answer, the penthouse intercom buzzed. "Sir, there's a visitor," the guard's voice crackled. "He says he's Ms. Nolan's legal representative." Grace frowned. "My lawyer?" She hadn't hired one. Alexander motioned for the guard to let the man up. Moments later, a tall, neatly dressed attorney entered, mid-40s, sharp eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Nolan," he greeted smoothly. "My name is Daniel Huxley. I represent your mother's medical trust." Grace stiffened. "My mother doesn't have a trust?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not under that name. Margaret Nolan is an alias. Her real name, legally registered, is Madeline Ward." The words hit like a slap. Grace's knees nearly gave out. "That's impossible." He opened his briefcase and laid out documents, birth certificates, hospital discharge forms, notarized signatures. Mrs. Ward gave birth under the pseudonym Margaret Nolan. Evelyn Ward's legal team falsified the death record and transferred guardianship of the child to the hospital staff nurse, your mother, in name only. Grace's breath hitched. "You're saying the woman I called Mom wasn't really my mother?" Daniel met her gaze. "She raised you. She loved you. But biologically, no. You are the daughter of Madeline and Alexander Ward." Alexander went still, every muscle tense. "Why come forward now?" Daniel's smile faded. "Because Evelyn Ward is making her final move. She's filing a federal injunction to seize control of Ward Systems and declare both of you mentally unfit to manage it. This," he gestured to the documents, "is your only defense." Before Grace could process, the penthouse lights flickered. Then, from the television, a breaking report cut through. "Exclusive. Secret recording. Leaked Alexander Ward. Offered millions to silence." Waitress daughter claim. Video footage appeared grainy but unmistakable. Alexander's voice, calm and cold. "Give her what she wants, then make her disappear." Grace's heart stopped. "What is that?" Alexander shook his head in disbelief. "It's fake. Edited." "I never said that." But the damage was done. The phone began to ring. Reporters, lawyers, investors. Grace stepped back, eyes full of hurt. "I trusted you." "Grace, please," he said, reaching for her. "This is Evelyn's doing. You have to believe me. I don't know what to believe anymore." She grabbed the documents from the table and ran towards the elevator. Alexander shouted after her, but she was gone before the doors closed. In the silence that followed, Daniel Huxley turned to Alexander with a slow, knowing smile. "Phase 3 completed," he said softly into his hidden earpiece. "The girl's alone now." Snow swirled through the streets as Grace stumbled out of Ward Tower, clutching the stolen documents to her chest. The cold bit at her skin, but she barely felt it. Her mind was spinning too fast, her whole life collapsing like glass underfoot. Madeline Ward was her real mother, The woman she'd mourned for years, the one she'd believed died before she was born, had lived under a false name and raised her as someone else's child. Taxi lights flashed, horns blared, the city roared around her, but Grace moved through it like a ghost. She ducked into an alley and crouched against the brick wall, breathing hard. The snow soaked through her jeans. She fumbled the documents open with trembling fingers. There it was again, her name rewritten, her life rewritten. Grace Madeline Ward. Tears blurred the words. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Grace Nolan?" a woman's voice asked, cool and deliberate. "Who's this?" "My name isn't important. But I can tell you why your mother had to disappear." Grace's breath caught. "What do you know?" "I know the truth Evelyn Ward buried 24 years ago. Meet me at Pier 19, midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. Grace stared at the screen, pulse racing. It was probably a trap, but she had nothing left to lose. By midnight, the harbor was shrouded in mist. The water lapped quietly against the docks. Grace stood by the rusted rail, the city lights reflecting off the icy waves. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman wrapped in a long black coat. Her hair was silver, her face partly hidden by a scarf. "Grace," she said softly. Grace stepped back, heart hammering. "How do you know my name?" The woman removed her scarf. Even in the dim light, Grace froze. Her face the same eyes, the same bone structure. It was like looking into a mirror of herself 30 years older. "Because I'm your mother," the woman said. "Your real mother." Grace couldn't breathe. "That's impossible. You died." Madeline Ward smiled sadly. "That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Evelyn made sure of it. She faked my death the night you were born." Grace's voice shook. "Why? Why hide me?" "Because you weren't supposed to exist," Madeline said. "Evelyn hated me for marrying Alexander. She called me a distraction, a stain on the family's legacy. When I got pregnant, she tried to force me into an abortion. When I refused, she arranged the crash. A nurse, your adoptive mother, saved me, hid me under her name. I owed her my life." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "She risked everything for us." Madeline nodded. "She raised you as her own, so Evelyn could never find you. But Evelyn discovered the truth anyway. That's why she's destroying you now." Grace clutched the rail. "She already has. Everyone thinks I'm a liar." Madeline stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then we tell the truth together. I've kept proof all these years, medical records, financial transfers, Evelyn's signed confession, everything she buried." Grace blinked through her tears. "Where?" "In a safe deposit box at the old Boston Trust Bank. But we'll need Alexander. He's the only one who can access it." Grace hesitated. "I don't know if I can trust him." Madeline's eyes softened. "He doesn't know I'm alive. Evelyn told him I died, and that our child died with me. That's why he searched for you." "Grace, he's not your enemy." Before Grace could answer, headlights swept across the dock. A black SUV screeched to a halt. Madeline's face went pale. "They found us." The passenger door opened. Cara Lewis stepped out, gun glinting under the harbor light. "Hello, ladies," she said coolly. "Family reunions are so touching. Too bad this one ends tonight." Madeline pushed Grace behind her. "Run!" A shot echoed over the frozen water. The gunshot cracked through the night like thunder, scattering gulls from the pier. Grace dropped to her knees, the sound still ringing in her ears. For a second, she couldn't breathe, then she saw it. Her mother, Madeline, collapsed on the wet wooden planks, blood blooming across her coat. "No!" Grace screamed, crawling toward her. "Mom, please, stay with me!" Cara Lewis stepped closer, gun raised again, her expression calm, clinical. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Grace. It's over." Grace's eyes blazed. "You shot her!" Kara tilted her head slightly. "Correction. I ended 24 years of disobedience." Before she could fire again, headlights flared from the far end of the pier. A second vehicle skidded to a halt. Alexander Ward leapt out, gun drawn. "Drop it, Kara!" Kara smirked. "You're too late, Alexander. She's dying, and so is your legacy." He fired once, clean and precise. The bullet hit her shoulder. Kara stumbled backward, the gun clattering to the ground before she slipped off the edge of the dock and vanished into the black water below. Alexander ran to Grace's side. She's alive!" Grace sobbed. "But she's bleeding bad!" They lifted Madeline between them, carrying her to the back seat of Alexander's car. He shouted orders into his phone as they sped through the streets, sirens echoing in the distance. At the Safe House Clinic, the emergency lights glowed dim red. A doctor on Alexander's payroll worked quickly, bandaging, stitching, stabilizing. Grace stood outside the room, shaking, her hands still sticky with blood. Alexander joined her, his face carved from guilt. "I didn't know she was alive," he said hoarsely. "God, all these years I thought I buried her." Grace turned to him, eyes full of tears and rage. "Your mother did this. She tried to erase us both." He nodded grimly, and she nearly succeeded. Hours passed before the doctor emerged. "Shell live," he said, "but she needs rest. No more shocks tonight." Grace rushed into the room. Madeline lay pale but conscious, an IV running into her arm. When her eyes opened, the same soft blue as Grace's, she whispered, "I thought I'd lost you." Grace knelt beside her bed, gripping her hand. "I'm right here. Don't you dare leave me again." Madeline smiled weakly. "I won't. But you need to listen. There's something I never told you. Something about the ring." Grace frowned. "What about it?" "The ring isn't just a family heirloom," Madeline said slowly. "It's a key." Grace blinked. "A key?" Madeline nodded. "Hidden inside the band is a microchip. It contains everything Evelyn tried to destroy bank records, medical reports, proof of how she manipulated the courts and the company. Your mother, the one who raised you, found it after the crash. She kept it safe all these years, waiting for you to be strong enough to face the truth." Grace looked down at the golden ring glinting faintly under the hospital light. "You're saying this tiny thing can bring her down?" "It's more than evidence," Madeline whispered. "It's justice." The door creaked open. Alexander entered quietly. His gaze softened when he saw Madeline awake, but she turned her head away. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly. He flinched. "I thought you were dead." "Evelyn." "Evelyn lied to both of us," Madeline interrupted. "But you let her. You built an empire on her lies." Alexander lowered his head. "And he'll spend the rest of my life undoing them." Grace stood between them, her voice steady for the first time. "We can argue later. Right now, we use that ring and end this." Madeline looked at her daughter with a faint smile of pride. "You really are my child." But before Grace could reply, the power suddenly went out. The room plunged into darkness, and the generator failed to start. Alexander's voice cut through the silence. "She's found us again." From outside came the echo of approaching footsteps, measured, confident, unmistakable. Evelyn Ward's voice drifted down the hallway, smooth and venomous. "Well," she said, "it seems the family reunion finally started without me." The emergency lights flickered back to life, casting a red glow over the sterile white room. Evelyn Ward stood framed in the doorway, elegant in a tailored black coat, her silver hair swept into a perfect twist. The guards behind her looked more like soldiers than bodyguards. Her eyes cold, sharp, merciless, swept across the room until they landed on Madeline. "Well," Evelyn said softly, "you've aged better than I expected for a dead woman." Grace moved instinctively in front of her mother. "Stay away from her," Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So this is the girl who ruined everything, the waitress who thought she could challenge a dynasty. Alexander stepped forward, jaw tight. Mother, enough. You're done controlling this family. Controlling? She repeated, feigning offense. Alexander, my dear, I built this family. Without me, ward systems would have collapsed decades ago. You were too weak, too sentimental, just like your father. Grace clenched her fists. You destroyed lives. You lied to protect your company. Evelyn's gaze cut to her, gleaming with disdain. I protected the ward name. Your mother, she nodded toward Madeline. Was a mistake, I corrected. Madeline's voice, though weak, was sharp as glass. You tried to kill me. You tried to kill your own grandchild. Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time. Collateral damage. Grace took a step closer, fury trembling in her voice. You call me collateral? Evelyn tilted her head. You were never supposed to exist. You think you belong in this family because of blood. You're nothing but a scandal with a heartbeat. Alexander slammed his hand against the table. That's enough! Evelyn's voice turned icy. You'd destroy everything your father built for this waitress? She's not a waitress, Alexander said quietly. She's my daughter. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Evelyn blinked, once, slowly. Then she laughed, a cold, echoing sound that made Grace's skin crawl. Oh, my poor boy. You still believe in DNA and fairy tales. That test was never real. Grace frowned. What do you mean? Evelyn's smile returned, sharp and cruel. You think you're his daughter, don't you? You think you're the rightful heir. She stepped forward, heels clicking on the tile. But I had that first test altered too. I made you believe you were family till you destroy him from the inside, so I could watch him crumble under his own guilt. Grace's breath caught. You're lying. Am I? Evelyn said smoothly. You'll never know. The only thing you can be certain of is this. The world already believes you're a fraud. By tomorrow, they'll have proof. Alexander's voice hardened. We have proof, too. The ring. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Ah, yes. The ring. My husband's final gift. Do you know why it was made in pairs, Alexander? He hesitated. One holds memory, she said. The other evidence. You have the wrong one. Madeline's hand gripped Grace's wrist. Don't listen to her. She's bluffing. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside sat an identical gold ring, the twin. You think you're the only one who kept secrets? She said softly. I have mine, too. Grace stared, heart racing. How did you get that? I never lost it, Evelyn said simply. Because it was never yours. She slipped the ring onto her finger, smirking. You wanted the truth? Then come to the Ward Foundation Gala tomorrow night. In front of the cameras, you'll tell the world who you really are. With that, she turned and walked out, her guards following like shadows. The room was silent again, but Grace's heart thundered. Alexander looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't let her control the story. Grace met his eyes, determination replacing fear. Then tomorrow night, we take her stage and destroy her empire. The next evening, the Ward Foundation Gala unfolded beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Boston Grand Hall, a palace of glass and gold, built on money, ego, and secrets. The city's elite flooded through the doors in diamonds and tuxedos, unaware that tonight, their champagne-fueled celebration would turn into a bloodless war. Grace stood backstage, her pulse thundering. She wore a simple black gown borrowed from Madeline's, close elegant, but understated. Alexander stood beside her, straightening his tie with mechanical calm. The cameras outside were already flashing like lightning. This is madness, Grace muttered. She controls the crowd. The press, very thing. Alexander's gaze was steady. She controls fear, not truth. Remember that. Madeline, still pale but standing on her own, adjusted her daughter's necklace. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Grace shook her head. "Yes, I do. She's been writing my story since before I was born. It's time I tell it myself." The orchestra began its soft overture as Evelyn Ward took the stage. The crowd hushed instantly. She was radiant beneath the lights, wrapped in pearls and power. Her voice carried easily through the hall. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she began smoothly. "Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate innovation, but to restore the integrity of the Ward family name." The audience applauded politely. Cameras clicked. Evelyn smiled, then, with perfect poise, continued. "There have been recent rumors about a young woman claiming to be part of our family. Unfortunately, those rumors are nothing more than elaborate deception." The giant screen behind her flickered to life, revealing DNA results, the same forged report Evelyn had created. The words glowed in bold type. "No biological relation. Alexander Ward. Grace Nolan." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn turned, pretending sadness. "It grieves me that such lies have caused my son so much pain. But the truth must prevail." Backstage, Grace's throat burned. "She's turning the world against me again," she whispered. Alexander's hand clenched at his side. "Then it's time for our move." He nodded to the technician, one of his own men, who replaced Evelyn's video feed with another file. Suddenly, the screen flashed black, then displayed a recording. Evelyn's private conversation with Cara Lewis, secretly captured days earlier. Evelyn's voice filled the hall. "Alter the report. Make the girl look like a fraud. Alexander will crumble once the world believes he's been deceived." The audience gasped. Reporters surged forward. Evelyn's smile froze, her color draining. Alexander walked on stage with calm authority. Grace followed, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Mother," Alexander said, his voice echoing through the mic. "For years you've ruled this family with lies and fear, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever." Evelyn tried to recover, her voice trembling with anger. "You think a manipulated recording will save you?" Grace stepped forward, pulling the gold ring from a chain around her neck. The lights caught it, glinting like fire. "You're right. A recording isn't enough, but this is." She twisted the inner band, revealing a hidden chip. "This ring carries encrypted files. Your husband's original will, the offshore accounts you buried, the confession you signed 24 years ago. You hid everything. My mother risked her life to protect it." The crowd erupted into whispers. Evelyn's mask cracked. For the first time, pure fear flashed across her face. "You wouldn't?" she hissed. "I already did," Grace said quietly. "Everything on this chip has been sent to the press and the FBI." Reporters shouted questions as cameras swiveled toward Grace. Madeline appeared at the edge of the stage, tears glistening. Grace's voice shook but didn't falter. "I'm Grace Madeline Ward, the daughter you tried to erase, the truth you couldn't kill." Evelyn screamed, lunging forward, but Alexander stepped between them. "It's over." Security guards rushed in as Evelyn's empire collapsed under the weight of her own lies. Grace turned to the audience, trembling yet unbroken. "You can fake tests. You can forge papers. But you can't bury blood." The lights flared bright, cameras flashing, and for the first time, the world saw the real heir of the Ward legacy. The aftermath of the gala was chaos wrapped in gold and scandal. Reporters swarmed the exits, microphones thrust like weapons. Flashbulbs exploded as police escorted Evelyn Ward out in handcuffs. Her pearls were gone, her perfect hair disheveled, but her eyes still glimmered with venom. She spat words toward Grace as the cameras rolled. "You think you've won? You'll destroy him too. You'll destroy everything." Grace stood frozen at the edge of the stage, shaking under the glare of the lights. The crowd had turned from shock to frenzy, shouting questions, accusations, and praise all at once. She couldn't tell which way was up anymore. Her mother, Madeleine, was weeping quietly, and Alexander stood beside them both, the picture of a man whose entire world had just imploded. Security pushed the three of them into a side exit. The door slammed, muffling the roar of the outside world. Silence, finally. Grace leaned against the cold marble wall, clutching the ring that had just dismantled one of the most powerful families in America. Alexander's breathing was uneven. "It's done," he said, almost to himself. "She's finished." Madeleine looked at him, her voice trembling but steady. "No. This isn't finished until the truth about your father is known." He blinked. "My father?" She nodded slowly. "Evelyn wasn't acting alone. Your father helped her. The crash that killed Mayet wasn't an accident. He signed off on the insurance payout that made your company possible. That's the real inheritance you've been protecting." Alexander staggered back like he'd been struck. "You're saying my father knew?" "Yes," Madeleine said quietly. "He built his empire on blood money mine." Grace's stomach twisted. She looked between them, her voice breaking. "So all of this, every dollar, every headline, it's all from a lie." Alexander covered his face with his hands. The image of the strong billionaire melted away, leaving only a man broken by the weight of his own history. "I thought I was building something good," he said hoarsely. "I thought I was different from them." Madeleine stepped closer. "Then prove it. Tear it down. Start over." Outside, sirens wailed faintly, echoing against the cold night. Grace felt the tension in the air shift. Something inside her, the fear, the shame, the anger, snapped into focus. "She's right," Grace said softly. "You can't fix a house built on rot. You have to burn it down." Alexander looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "And what happens to you? To her?" Grace's voice didn't waver. "We survive. That's what your family never understood." He nodded slowly, then pulled a phone from his pocket. His voice was calm but final. "Call the board," he told his assistant. "Effective immediately. I'm resigning as CEO. Sell my shares. Liquidate everything. The money goes to the victims. Evelyn's corruption buried. Every last cent." Grace's heart ached as she watched him. "You don't have to lose everything." He smiled faintly. "Maybe losing everything is the only way to be free." They drove away from the grand hall in silence. The city glittered outside the window, beautiful and cruel. On every screen they passed, news anchors replayed the footage of Grace holding the ring. Her face illuminated by flashbulbs and fury. She had become a symbol overnight, the waitress who took down a dynasty. At a stoplight, Alexander finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For all of it. For not knowing who you were. For not protecting you sooner." Grace turned to him, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't rewrite the past, but you can stop repeating it." The light turned green. The city moved on. By dawn, the Ward name was already trending worldwide for the wrong reasons. Stocks plummeted. Investigations opened. Evelyn's empire crumbled faster than she had built it. And as the sun rose over the harbor, Grace stood on the balcony of Madeleine apartment, holding the ring up to the light. For the first time, it didn't look like power. It looked like closure. By morning, Boston was buzzing with the story that refused to die. News helicopters circled Ward Tower like vultures over a carcass. Every channel ran the same footage: Evelyn Ward's arrest, Alexander's resignation, and the haunting image of Grace standing in the middle of flashing cameras, holding the gold ring that had burned down an empire. She'd become an overnight legend, the waitress who brought down the Wards. But legends, Grace learned, come with consequences. She sat in a small apartment she and Madeleine had rented under fake names. watching the chaos unfold on TV. Reporters camped outside Alexander's mansion. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for the silenced," and "Money can't bury the truth." Madeline turned off the television. "They'll come after you next," she said quietly. Grace rubbed her temples. "They already have. I can't go online without seeing my face plastered everywhere. Some people call me a hero. Others call me a liar." Madeline placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "The world loves to build heroes, then tear them apart. You can't control that. You can only control who you are." A soft knock echoed at the door. Grace froze. Madeline motioned for her to stay quiet and peeked through the peephole. "It's him," she whispered. Grace opened the door to find Alexander standing there, unshaven, coat dusted with snow. He looked nothing like the billionaire who once owned half the city. He looked human. "Can I come in?" he asked. Madeline hesitated, then nodded. He stepped inside, glancing around the modest apartment. "You're both safe here?" "For now," Grace said, crossing her arms. "But I'm guessing that's about to change." He exhaled. "Evelyn's lawyers are already at work. She's claiming mental instability, saying I forced her into those decisions. She's trying to spin it into a family tragedy instead of a crime." Grace's jaw tightened. "She's rewriting the story again." "Not for long," Alexander said. "Federal investigators reached out this morning. They want testimony from both of you and the evidence from that ring." Madeline nodded slowly. "Well, give it to them. But there's something they need to see first." She opened a small box on the table and pulled out an old cassette tape labeled in faded ink. "E.W. Confession, 1999. Alexander's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "Your father recorded it," Madeline said. He realized what Evelyn was doing and tried to stop her. But she killed the story and him before he could speak. Grace held the tape carefully. "If this is real, it's not just her empire that falls. It's everything." Alexander looked at her, weary but resolute. "Then let it fall." They met with the federal investigators later that afternoon. Grace sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights, the same kind she'd once cleaned tables under, and played the tape. Evelyn's voice filled the room clear, cold, remorseless. It had to look like an accident. Madeline's death was necessary. No one will question a grieving widow. Silence followed. Even the agents looked stunned. Grace's hands shook, but her voice was firm. "That's the truth. That's the woman who called me a fraud." The lead investigator nodded. "This is enough to indict her for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. You've done the country a favor, Miss Ward." Grace blinked. "Miss Ward." He smiled faintly. "That's your name now. You've earned it." Outside, reporters swarmed again. But this time, Grace didn't hide. She stood beside Alexander and Madeline as cameras rolled, the truth finally on her side. Alexander spoke first. "For decades, my family used power to silence others. Today, that ends." Then Grace stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and unshaken. "My mother taught me that truth isn't about revenge, it's about freedom. And sometimes to build something real, you have to watch everything else burn." The flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Grace didn't flinch. The truth had finally burned through the lies, and for once, she wasn't running from the fire. The snow had turned to rain by the time Grace reached St. Mary's Hospital. The storm outside had passed, but inside her chest, another one raged quietly. She walked the familiar corridor, her footsteps echoing between sterile walls that smelled faintly of antiseptic and regret. Room 204 waited at the end, the same room her mother, the woman who had raised her, had once occupied. Madeline was resting again, pale but healing. Her breathing was steady, yet her body seemed too fragile for the weight of the world they had just shifted. Grace stood at the doorway for a long moment, afraid to disturb the peace that truth had cost them both. Alexander joined her silently, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn grey coat. He looked smaller now, stripped of power and polish. "She's stronger than she looks," he said softly. Grace nodded, her throat tight. She always was. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the heart monitor. Grace sat beside Madeline's bed, brushing a strand of silver hair from her forehead. For a while she said nothing. There was nothing left to ask, only what needed to be said. "You were right," Grace whispered. "The truth really does set you free. But no one tells you how much it hurts first." Madeline opened her eyes weakly. "Truth always costs something, sweetheart. The trick is making sure it costs the right people." Grace smiled faintly through tears. "You risked everything to protect me. I don't know if I could ever repay that." Her mother's voice was faint but firm. "You already have. You survived." Alexander stepped closer, his expression raw with remorse. "Madeline, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say I'm sorry. For believing she was gone. For letting Evelyn twist everything." Madeline's eyes flicked to him tired, but soft. "You were blind, Alexander, not cruel. There's a difference. You see clearly now." He swallowed hard. "I see what matters." Grace looked between them, realizing how much history sat unspoken between those two people, the love, the loss, the ruins of an empire. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. Alexander hesitated. "I've signed over ward systems to the government. The money will go toward victims of corporate fraud, the rest whatever's left is in a trust under your name and your mother's." Grace's eyes widened. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, "because for once, something good needs to come from my family's name." Madeline reached weakly for his hand. "You can't fix the past," she murmured, "but you can stop it from owning your future." For a long time, the three of them stayed silent, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, a quiet reminder that life, even fragile, keeps going. Later that night, Madeline stirred again, her voice barely a whisper. "Grace?" Grace leaned in. "I'm here, Mum. Promise me you'll live for yourself now. Not for the lies, not for revenge. Just live." Tears spilled freely down Grace's cheeks. "I promise." Madeline smiled faintly, eyes closing. "Good. Then I can rest." The monitor beeped steadily for another minute before the line went flat. Grace froze. "No, no, no, please." She called for help, but the nurses already knew. They rushed in, machines blaring, voices urgent. But deep down, Grace understood. Her mother had held on long enough to make sure the truth was free. Alexander put a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes wet. She was brave to the end. Grace clutched the ring hanging from her neck, the symbol of everything lost and found. She kissed it, whispering, "For truth, not power." As dawn broke over the grey city, Grace stood at the window, watching the rain wash away the last of the snow. For the first time, the world outside didn't feel like something she had to escape. It felt like something she could finally begin. The rain had not stopped for days. Boston seemed to mourn with Grace, its streets slick and quiet, washed clean of the chaos that had ruled them for weeks. The news had moved on. Evelyn Ward's arrest, Alexander's resignation, Madeline's passing. The empire was gone, but so was the woman who had given Grace her strength. She walked through the cemetery in a long black coat, umbrella trembling against the wind. The gravestone was simple. Madeline Ward, beloved mother. Truth never dies. Grace knelt, fingers brushing the damp grass. "You kept me alive, even when the world tried to erase us," she whispered. "Now it's my turn to live for you." Behind her, footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Alexander Ward stopped a few paces away, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. He looked older than his years, the weight of regret etched into every line on his face. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said quietly. Grace stayed still. "You didn't have to come." "I did," he said. "She was my wife. And you—" He stopped himself, voice breaking. "You're my daughter, whether you ever call me that or not." Grace turned to face him. His suit was soaked through, but he didn't seem to care. "I don't hate you, Alexander," she said softly. "I just don't know how to forgive you yet." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's fair. Forgiveness isn't a gift I deserve, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." He knelt beside her at the grave, setting the flowers down next to the stone. For a while, they both said nothing. The rain whispered between them, washing away the silence that had stood for too long. Finally, Alexander reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "This was hers," he said, handing it to Grace. Inside lay a gold ring. Madeline's original, the twin to the one Grace had carried for months. The engraving inside was faint but legible. "AW to MW, forever forgiven." Grace's breath hitched. "You found it?" He nodded. "I took it from Evelyn's safe before the police arrived. I didn't want it to be used as evidence. It belongs with you." Grace turned the ring over in her palm, the metal warm despite the cold air. "She forgave you," she said quietly. Alexander's voice cracked. "I don't know how she could." "Because she knew you'd need it," Grace whispered. They stood together under the rain, neither speaking. Then Alexander said, "I'm leaving the city. Ward Systems is gone, but I've started a new foundation, the Nolan Fund. It'll support single mothers, women like Margaret, who saved my daughter's life. It's the only good thing I know how to build anymore." Grace smiled faintly, tears mixing with the rain. "Shed like that." He looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time, there was no power between them, no bloodlines or lies. Just two people bound by loss and a shared promise to do better. "I'll visit every year," he said. "If you'll let me." Grace nodded. She'd want that too. Before he turned to leave, she called after him. "Alexander?" He stopped. She took a deep breath. "You asked once if forgiveness was possible. I think maybe it's not something we give. It's something we live." A flicker of peace crossed his face. "Then I'll live it." He walked away through the rain, disappearing into the mist that hung over the cemetery. Grace stayed, her fingers tracing the ring one last time before slipping it onto her necklace beside her mother's. The clouds broke just enough for a sliver of sunlight to touch the grave. Grace looked up, eyes glistening. "For truth, not power," she whispered again. "And for love, not legacy." The rain eased, leaving only silence and the faint echo of peace. 1 year later, Boston felt different. The towers still scraped the sky, but they no longer bore the Ward name. The empire that had once ruled the city's skyline was gone, sold, dissolved, and transformed into something humbler, something human. Grace Nolan, Grace Ward, as the newspapers now called her, who walked through a quiet corner of South Boston where a new building stood, the Madeline Foundation. Its glass doors gleamed with sunlight, but inside there was no luxury, no pretense, only warmth. The walls were lined with photos of women and children the foundation had helped, survivors of debt, loss, and silence. She paused in front of one photo, a young single mother holding her newborn. Underneath it, a small plaque read, "For those who kept going when the world told them to stop." "Good morning, Miss Ward," her assistant greeted. "The new donors are waiting for you in the conference room." Grace smiled. "Tell them I'll be right there." When she entered the room, a group of women social workers, teachers, nurses, stood to applaud her. She still wasn't used to that. She didn't feel like a hero, just someone who had survived long enough to make something right. The meeting ran smoothly, filled with laughter and stories of small victories. A scholarship funded, a shelter opened, a family reunited. For once, Grace didn't feel like she was fighting against something. She was building something new. Afterward, she walked outside into the crisp spring air. Across the street, a small coffee shop had opened on the same spot where the old Ruby's Diner used to be. The smell of roasted beans drifted through the air, bringing a faint smile to her lips. A familiar voice called out, "You still take it black." Grace turned. Alexander Ward stood at one of the caff tables, dressed casually in a wool coat and scarf. His hair had grayed more this year, but his eyes, soft, humble, were the same. She walked over, smiling. "No," she said. "I finally learned to add sugar." He laughed quietly, sliding a cup toward her. Progress. They sat together, letting the world move around them. No reporters, no flashbulbs, just two people sharing coffee and silence. "How's the foundation doing?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Grace said. "We just partnered with the city to expand programs for low-income mothers. Your Nolan fund made that possible." He nodded. "It's not mine anymore. It's hers." Grace's gaze softened. "Madeline would have been proud of you." Alexander's voice dropped. "I hope so. I'm still learning how to be the man she believed I could be." "You're getting there," Grace said gently. He smiled, then reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, a small velvet box. "I wanted you to have this. It's not jewelry. Don't worry." Inside lay 2 rings, Madeline's and Alexander's, melted together into one band. The engraving read, "Family. Forgiven." Grace's throat tightened. "It's beautiful. I had it made after the trial," he said, "to remind us that what's broken can still be rebuilt, just differently." Grace slipped the ring onto her finger. "Then maybe we both get a second chance." He looked at her, proud and at peace. "You already took yours. You turned our curse into something worth living for." A bell chimed as the caff door opened. A mother and her little boy walked in, laughing. Grace watched them, her heart swelling with a quiet ache that wasn't pain anymore, it was gratitude. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the foundation's glass sign across the street. Grace stood, finished her coffee, and looked toward the horizon. Alexander rose beside her. "Where to now?" She smiled. "Anywhere the truth still needs a voice." Together they walked down the street, the city bathed in gold light. The storm was over. The empire was gone. But from its ashes, something honest had finally been born. And as Grace touched the ring that bound past and future, she whispered, "For truth, for family, for her." So that's how the story ends. What a journey, right? If you're still here with me now, it means something in this story touched your heart. Maybe not just Grace's fight for truth, but the part of her that never gave up even when everything seemed broken. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part in all of us that refuses to stay silent when life tries to bury who we really are. You see, healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about standing in the wreckage and choosing to rebuild anyway. The Stoics used to say, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Marcus Aurelius wrote that centuries ago, and it's still true today. Every wound, every betrayal, every storm, it's not there to destroy us, but to shape us into someone stronger, quieter, more real. So if you've been through your own storm, if you're standing in your truth even when it hurts, know that you're not alone. Grace's story reminds us that light doesn't come from perfection. It comes from survival, from courage, from love. If this story spoke to you, hit like. Share it with someone who needs a little strength tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, because more stories of truth, hope, and healing are waiting for you right here.